So in establishing that systematic risk is the only risk that matters with respect to expected return, it raised two questions. The first is how do we measure systematic risk? And we established that we measure it by beta. And the second, which we're going to address now, is how is the expected return related to systematic risk? So how is expected return related to beta? And the answer to that question is through the CAPM, the Capital Asset Pricing Model. So what is the CAPM? The CAPM, well, before getting into the CAPM, let's set something up, something called the market risk premium. It's also called the market premium. Those are synonymous. And that's the expected return on the market minus the risk-free rate. So the market is a collection of all assets that exist. So every stock, every bond, every piece of real estate, every jewel, every baseball card, every collectible, um, porcelain figurine, everything. So the expected return on everything, and a lot of times in practice, investors hold the market. Doesn't mean they own everything. They own a little bit of everything. And you subtract out the risk-free rate. So if you owned everything, expected return on the market is what your return would be. If you had no risk, you get the risk-free rate. So the difference up here, which I'm highlighting in yellow right now, that is the market risk premium, how much extra you would get as compensation for holding on to the market. That's really important because it is the compensation that you get for holding the market, for holding everything, but everything, the overall market, if you hold everything, then your portfolio has an average amount of systematic risk because everything by definition in the aggregate is average because average is a way of trying to reflect everything. So if you've got a little bit of this or a little bit of that and a little bit of this or all of this or all of that and all of that and all that on it's going to be average, and therefore this market premium tells us how much extra we get, what the compensation is for taking on an average amount of systematic risk. So it's really important. We're always going to assume that the market premium is positive, that the expected return on the market is greater than the risk-free rate. So if you took on no risk, you would get that. If you invested in the market and took on an average amount of risk, you would get a higher expected return. If we didn't have that assumption, the world gets a lot more complicated. It doesn't make intuitive sense, and this makes intuitive sense. So this is the assumption we make. So this is the CAPM equation. What it says is that the expected return on stock I is equal to the risk-free rate plus stock I's beta times the market risk premium. So let's break it down because it's a really elegant, beautiful equation that is consistent with so many of the things we've talked about this semester. We've talked about how the expected return on any asset depends on two things. The first is compensation for delayed consumption. If there's absolutely no risk, this is how much the expected return would be for a stock. But if there's any risk, then you get the extra. You get the risk premium associated with the level of risk for that asset or that portfolio. And so the second part is the risk premium. And it reflects all of that in green, which is the asset's systematic risk, its beta, which is how much systematic risk, how much risk that matters, stock I has, multiplied by the risk premium. So this is how much extra somebody would get if they had an average amount of systematic risk. But this guy may or may not have an average amount, and so we want to take into account how much it has, and that gets us the risk premium for this particular asset. So it's pretty elegant. Take a minute to look at it. I'm gonna highlight it in a few more of this idea. So this part in particular gets driven home, and then the next video will cover an example. So as we said, the expected return is equal to the risk-free rate plus beta times the market premium. If asset I has a beta of, beta, then it has beta times 100% of the average amount of systematic risk. So beta tells you something about how much systematic risk this particular stock has relative to the average stock. So suppose a stock had a beta of 1.25. That's telling us that this stock has 125% of the average amount of systematic risk. The systematic risk for this guy is 125% that of an average stock. Suppose the stock had a beta of 0.65. Then it only has 65% of the average amount of systematic risk. It's less than average. So what does that mean? The risk premium for asset I is equal to its beta times the market premium. And so the risk premium for asset I is equal to its beta times the market risk premium. And so this is how much extra you get if you have an average amount of risk. But based on what a particular stock's beta is, this tells us how much risk it actually has. And so that product tells us what percent of the risk premium associated with average risk this guy's going to get. So let's look at some examples to make those words more clear. Suppose the market risk premium is 10.00%. If I have a stock with a beta of 1.25, as we established in the previous slide, it has 125% of its systematic risk, its level of systematic risk is 125% that you would find in an average risk stock. Therefore, what we're saying here is because it has 125% of the risk, its risk premium should be 125% of the risk premium associated with an average risk stock. Well, an average risk stock gets 10%. He'll get 125% of 10%, 1.25 times 10%, 12.50%. That's the risk premium for a stock with a beta of 1.25. Now we got a below average stock. Only has 65% of the average amount of risk. Therefore, the risk premium that it should get should only be 65% of that a stock would get if it had an average amount of risk. 65% of 10%, 6.5%. If you had a beta of 1, then you would get 10.00%. So the CAPM, it's easy to talk about it initially in terms of individual stocks, but it holds for portfolios as well. So if you had the portfolio beta, multiply it by the market premium, that tells you the risk premium for the portfolio. Add the risk-free return, because that's what you get if there's no risk. This part here that I'm filling in now is how much extra you get because you have that much risk. That's the expected return for a portfolio. When you're doing problems, pay attention to the information that's provided. If you're given the expected return on the market, then that's what you're given, and you have to apply the CAPM, as you see, by subtracting out the risk-free rate in order to get the market premium. If you're given the market premium or the market risk premium, those are synonymous, then you're given the expected return on the market minus the risk-free rate. And you don't want to subtract out the risk-free rate because then you're double subtracting out. It's already taken out when you have the market premium or the market risk premium. So pay close attention.